today is the last day. Not of the week, not of the month, of the entire astrological year, the complete 1-2-month cycle of the Zodiac. Every sign, every season, every reckoning the sky has delivered since the cosmic clock last reset. Today, March 21st, 2026, is the final day of Pisces season, the final day of Mercury retrograde, the final day of the person you have been carrying through one of the most relentless astrological seasons most of us have ever lived through. Tomorrow at 10:46 inches the morning, Eastern Time, the sun crosses into Aries and the new year begins. Tomorrow at 3:33 inches the afternoon, Mercury stations direct, and the fog that has been sitting on everything, your thoughts, your words, your unfinished sentences, finally lifts. Tomorrow, the wheel turns, the slate clears, the road opens. But today is not tomorrow. Today is still the last night of what was. And what you do in these final hours, specifically what you choose to name, to face, and to release before the clock turns over, is one of the most consequential decisions you will make in the entire cycle that is ending. Here is the truth about new beginnings that almost no one tells you. They do not happen automatically. Not because the sun moves into a new sign. Not because Mercury turns direct and your inbox starts making sense again. Not because the calendar flips and you feel, briefly, like something has shifted. A new beginning only becomes genuinely new when you make a deliberate decision about what you are not bringing with you. When you stand at the threshold with full awareness of what you are carrying and choose consciously, specifically, without flinching to set it down before you cross. Most people will not do that today. They will spend today anticipating tomorrow, scrolling, planning, mentally decorating the new year before they have finished clearing the old one. And in doing so, they will carry everything they were trying to leave behind, straight across the threshold, and wonder, weeks from now, why nothing feels different. Do not be most people. Today is not a waiting room. It is not the unremarkable eve of a more significant tomorrow. Today is one of the most powerful releasing windows in the entire astrological cycle, not because of a single dramatic planetary event, but because of where it sits, the final degree of the final sign, the last breath before dissolution. The moment when the cycle has gathered everything it has been building for 12 months and holds all of it in one suspended instant before releasing it entirely. That suspended instant is today. That is the breath you are living inside right now. What you release in this breath consciously, deliberately, with your eyes open and your hands steady, does not cross the threshold with you. It stays here, in the Pisces dissolution, completing at midnight, in the old cycle, in the old version of a life you are about to leave behind. That is the gift, and it is not a small one. Stay with me through what comes next, because I am going to walk you through exactly what needs to be released before tonight, not in vague spiritual abstractions, but in the specific, real, bone-level categories of what this extraordinary season, from the solar eclipse on February 17th to this final hour, has been building toward asking you to let go of. 5 things. Precise and personal, and a releasing process you can begin before midnight, so that when you wake tomorrow in the Aries New Year, with Mercury direct and the sun burning fresh at 0 degrees, you are not dragging the weight of the old cycle into the new one. Tomorrow the new year begins, but only for the version of you who did what tonight is asking. Before we get to what needs to be released, you need to understand the full weight of what you have actually been through, not a summarized, softened, highlight reel version of it. The real scope. Because you cannot consciously release something you have not yet fully acknowledged carrying. And most people, even those who lived through every one of these events, have not stopped long enough to look at the complete picture of what this year actually contained. So stop, right now, and look. The astrological year that ends tonight began on March 20th, 2025. The morning the sun crossed into Aries and the cosmic clock reset to 0. That was the starting line. And from that day forward, you moved through an entire complete cycle of the Zodiac, every sign, every season, every planetary shift and personal rupture and quiet interior revolution that followed. 12 months, a full orbit, an entire year of growth and loss and confrontation and becoming. Each chapter building on the wreckage and the wisdom of the one before it. That alone would be enough. But then came February, and February changed everything. What arrived in the final month of this astrological year was not one significant event. It was not two. It was a sequence compressed, relentless, precisely orchestrated that in any other year would have been spread across 12 months. The sky chose to deliver it all at once. In 30 days. In the final 30 days of a cycle that had already demanded everything you had. It began on February 17th with a solar eclipse that did not dim the light gradually. It cut it, clean and surgical. Old structures you had been maintaining, some out of genuine belief, some out of sheer habit, some out of a fear too familiar to have a name anymore, cracked at their foundations and did not recover. 3 days later, on February 20th, Saturn and Neptune met in exact conjunction for the first time in 36 years. The last time these two planets stood together, you were a different person living inside a different understanding of what your life was going to be. This conjunction dissolved the architecture of illusion. Not gently, not with warning. It simply removed the scaffolding from everything that had been built on something other than truth, and let you see, for the first time, without the scaffolding obscuring the view, what was actually standing and what had only been pretending to. Then Mercury stationed retrograde in Pisces and pulled you underwater for 22 days, into everything unspoken, everything unresolved, every conversation you had sealed behind a door you told yourself you had locked for good reason. Mercury retrograde in Pisces does not respect those locks. It does not negotiate with your avoidance. It simply opens the doors, one by one, in the dark, and leaves you standing in rooms you had forgotten you were still living in. On March 3rd, the total lunar blood moon eclipse arrived, the last one the sky will produce until 2028, and it cleared a chapter of your life with the quiet finality of a door closing in an empty house. You felt it, the specific weight of something permanently completed. Not paused, not postponed. Done. After that, the sky did not slow down. Jupiter stationed direct after 4 months of retrograde and opened what had been sealed since November. Venus entered Aries and ignited the most direct, most uncompromising love energy of the entire year. Mars conjuncted the north node of destiny and pointed, not suggested, pointed at the direction your soul has been trying to move toward through every obstruction this year placed in its path. The moon moved over Pluto and excavated power you had buried so deep you had begun to mistake its absence for your nature. Mercury and Mars collided in the most electrically charged communication transit of the year. The Mercury Cazimi burned through the last of the retrograde fog and delivered the clearest, most unignorable insight of the entire cycle. And last night, the final new moon of the astrological year opened the last planting window before the cycle closes completely at midnight tonight. All of that, in 1 month, the final month of a year that had already changed you, which means you are not arriving at tonight's threshold as the same person who walked into February. That person is gone. You are arriving as someone who has been cleared and cracked open and excavated and activated and redirected and, in the most precise sense of the word, initiated by one of the most concentrated sequences of astrological intensity any of us have moved through in years. What the sky is asking you to release tonight is not random. It is not general. It is the specific residue of everything that season surfaced, everything it showed you about what is no longer true, no longer aligned, no longer genuinely yours, to carry across the threshold into the year that begins tomorrow. Here are the 5 things the astrological year that ends tonight is asking you to leave behind before midnight. The first thing to release before midnight tonight, the story that kept you small. Not a metaphor, not a therapeutic concept borrowed from a podcast you half listened to on the subway. A specific, operational narrative that has been running underneath every decision you have made, every risk you did not take, every version of yourself you edited before letting it into the light. A story so embedded in the architecture of how you move through the world that most of the time you do not experience it as a story at all. You experience it as reality, as fact, as the reasonable, evidence-based conclusion about who you are and what someone like you is permitted to want. Today, that is the story. And tonight, it stays behind. Here is where it came from. Not from you. That is the first thing to understand, and the hardest to truly absorb. The story was not authored by you. It was handed to you by parents who were themselves living inside stories they had never examined, carrying wounds they had never named, operating from conclusions about the world that their own pain had generated and that they passed forward without knowing what they were passing. It came from relationships that reflected a diminished version of you back often enough and consistently enough that the reflection began to feel like a mirror rather than a distortion. It came from a world that has very precise, very enforced ideas about who gets to take up space, whose ambition is admirable and whose is presumptuous, whose desire is inspiring and whose is unrealistic, who gets to want more and who should learn to be grateful for what they have. You absorbed the verdict before you were old enough to appeal it, and then you built a life inside it. Not because you were weak, not because you lacked vision or courage or the raw capacity for something larger, but because the story was so thoroughly installed, so indistinguishable from your own internal voice, that questioning it felt less like liberation and more like delusion. Wanting more felt dangerous. Believing you deserved more felt arrogant. Moving toward the version of your life that actually matched your interior size felt like a gamble you had no right to make. So you made yourself smaller. Consistently. Quietly. In ways so habitual they stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like personality. This retrograde season changed that. Not comfortably. Not from the safe, cushioned distance of intellectual self-awareness. From the inside. The blood moon on March 3rd did not ask permission before it illuminated what you had been living inside. The Mercury retrograde did not offer you the option of examining your narrative on your own schedule, at your own pace, when you felt sufficiently prepared. The Pluto excavation of recent days did not knock. These transits moved through your interior life, the way a searchlight moves through a dark room, not looking for anything in particular, just refusing to leave anything in the dark. And what they found, in most of you, was this: a story, specific, persistent, quietly devastating in its precision. The one that says, you are almost enough. The one that says wanting this much makes you difficult. The one that says the evidence of your life so far is proof that this is the appropriate scale for someone like you. The one that has been making your life narrower than your actual capacity for as long as you can remember, and has been so effective at doing so that you have sometimes mistaken the narrowness for wisdom. Tonight, that story does not cross the threshold with you. Not because you are pretending it was never there. It was there. It shaped real years of your real life, and the cost of it was real, and that deserves to be acknowledged rather than bypassed in a rush toward the new. But acknowledged is not the same as carried forward. Witnessed is not the same as preserved. Tonight, you look at the story clearly, not with contempt, not with the performative self-compassion that keeps everything safely abstract, and you make a specific, named, unambiguous decision. This story ends here. At the threshold of the old year, in the final hours of the final day of the cycle that surfaced it. Take a piece of paper tonight. Write the story down in one sentence if you can. The specific sentence. The belief at the center of it. The verdict you have been living inside. Write it the way you would write a confession, plainly, without decoration, without the softening language you normally use to make it more palatable. Then release it. Burn the paper if you have a safe way to do so. Tear it into pieces. Bury it. Whatever physical act carries the weight of a real decision for you, because the physical act is not ceremonial theater. It is the body's participation in something the mind has already chosen. And the body needs to participate for the release to reach all the way down to where the story actually lives. The magic is not in the flame. The magic is in the moment you decide consciously, specifically, without flinching that the version of you crossing tomorrow's threshold is not governed by a narrative that was never genuinely yours to begin with. The new year opens tomorrow without that story. For the first time, you will feel the difference in how much room there is. The second thing to release before midnight tonight. The relationship dynamic that has been draining you. This is the one you will feel the most resistance to naming. Not because you do not know what it is, you know exactly what it is. You have known for longer than this retrograde season, longer than this astrological year, probably longer than you are comfortable admitting right now. The resistance is not ignorance. It is something more complicated and more human than that. It is the weight of real people on the other side of the pattern. Real histories. Real love. In many cases. Real fear about what changes if you stop participating in the dynamic the way you always have. Because unlike the story you carry alone, inside the privacy of your own skull, a relationship dynamic involves another person who has built their own expectations around your participation in it. And that makes releasing it feel less like freedom and more like betrayal. It is not betrayal, but we will get to that. First, understand what is actually being released tonight. Not the relationship, not the person, not the history or the love, or the genuine connection that may exist underneath the pattern. What is being released is your participation in the specific dynamic, the particular choreography of giving and withholding and accommodating and shrinking and absorbing that has been costing you something real during this season. That distinction matters. It is not a minor semantic difference. It is the entire difference between an ending and a correction. This season made the dynamic visible in ways that earlier in the year it was not. Venus, entering Aries on March 6th, did not arrive gently. Aries does not do gentle. It does direct. It does honest. It holds the mirror at an angle that removes every flattering shadow and shows you the precise gap between the standard you deserve and the standard you have been accepting. The Mars conjunction with the North Node of Destiny pointed at your evolutionary direction with the bluntness of something that has run out of patience for your detours. And the Pluto excavation of recent days reached into the hidden rooms of your power, the power you have been distributing into relationships that were not built to receive it, that were taking it without reciprocating it, that had grown comfortable with an arrangement that nourished one side of the exchange and quietly depleted the other. You felt the cost of it. The blood moon made sure of that. Total lunar eclipses do not allow for the comfortable numbness of not quite knowing. They illuminate. Completely. And what they illuminated in the landscape of your closest relationships was the specific place where your energy has been going out and not coming back. Where you have been giving more than you receive, not occasionally, not in the temporary imbalance that all real relationships move through, but consistently, structurally, as the default operating mode of the connection, or where you have been making yourself smaller, editing your full expression, softening your actual opinions, dimming the parts of yourself that you learned, somewhere along the way, were too much for this particular person to hold without discomfort, or where you have been absorbing treatment that falls below what you know, in the part of you that the retrograde stripped bare. You actually deserve accepting it, not because you believe it is right, but because the fear of losing the connection has been outweighing the cost of staying inside the imbalance, or where you have become the permanent caretaker. The therapist, the stabilizer, the person whose own needs have learned to wait so consistently that they have stopped announcing themselves altogether. You know which one it is. The Mercury retrograde made it impossible not to know. The blood moon made it impossible not to feel the accumulated cost of it, pressing against your ribs like something that has been asking for air for a very long time. Tonight, you end your participation in that pattern, not the person. The pattern. Write it down with that precision. Name the dynamic, specifically the accommodation, the shrinking, the chronic overgiving, the accepting of less, and name the relationship it lives inside. Not to assign blame. Pisces, the sign dissolving at midnight tonight, does not deal in blame. It deals in release, in the willingness to let the water carry what you have been holding so that both banks can finally breathe. Write the sentence. I release my participation in the pattern of, and name it in my relationship with, and name them. Leave it at the threshold of the old year. Because the new year, beginning tomorrow, is one where your relationships are built on genuine reciprocity, on the standard that this entire extraordinary eclipse season has spent a month establishing inside you, quietly, insistently, at a level deeper than preference or comfort. A standard that the version of you arriving in the Aries new year tomorrow is no longer willing to negotiate below. The pattern ends here. At midnight, in the last breath of the old cycle, what the new year builds in its place will be worth what tonight requires. The third thing to release before midnight tonight: the guilt about wanting what you actually want. This is the deepest one, the most quietly pervasive, the one that has been operating the longest, running furthest below the surface, and doing the most damage in the places you are least likely to look, because it does not announce itself as damage. It announces itself as virtue, as selflessness, as the reasonable, mature, spiritually evolved conclusion that your needs are simply less urgent than everyone else's, and that the size of what you want says something unflattering about your character rather than something true about your capacity. That is not virtue. That is a cage that learned to call itself a value, and tonight it stays behind. Here is what makes this particular release so difficult to execute. Most people will not recognize the guilt as something they are carrying because it stopped feeling like guilt a long time ago, when something has been installed early enough and reinforced consistently enough. It stops presenting itself as an external imposition and starts presenting itself as an internal truth. It becomes indistinguishable from your own voice. So instead of experiencing the guilt, as a pressure, an accusation, a specific discomfort arising in response to a specific desire, you experience it as common sense, as perspective, as the reasonable assessment of someone who has learned to be realistic about what people like them are permitted to want. You do not feel guilty for wanting. You just quietly stop wanting. Or you want in the diminished, pre-apologized, already justified version, the desire that comes equipped with its own defense, its own explanation for why it is not selfish, its own evidence that it will benefit someone else before it benefits you, because that is the tax the guilt charges, not on the wanting itself, on the wanting that is genuinely, unapologetically yours, the desire that needs no justification, that serves no role, that cannot be explained by how useful it makes you or how much more lovable it renders you to the people whose approval you have been quietly running your decisions through for longer than you would like to count. Something you want, simply because you want it. Because it feels alive in a way that most of your life, if you are honest, does not. Because it is true and specific and undeniably yours in a way that has nothing to do with who it benefits or what it proves about your worth. That wanting, that is what the guilt has been taxing, and the tax has been enormous. Pisces, the sign the entire ending season has been dissolving through, is the sign most prone to this specific suffering. Pisces is so constitutionally attuned to the emotional field of everyone around it, so genuinely moved by the needs and wounds and hungers of others, that its own desires can begin to feel almost obscene by comparison, almost frivolous, almost like an indulgence that needs to be earned through sufficient self-erasure before it can be permitted to exist. The Piscean impulse toward merger, toward selflessness, toward the dissolution of the boundary between self and other. It is genuinely beautiful, and it is genuinely dangerous in equal measure, because a self that is perpetually dissolved has no container for its own wanting, and desire without a container does not disappear. It goes underground. 1/7 and Artie. 1/7, 1/7, 1/7. It becomes weight you carry without knowing you are carrying it. It becomes the specific, unnamed exhaustion of someone who has been feeding everyone at a table they have never been permitted to sit at themselves. This entire season has been dismantling that arrangement. Methodically, without your permission and without apology. Venus, entering Aries on March 6th, did not ask whether you were ready to want boldly. Aries' desire does not negotiate with your guilt. It simply burns, directly and without qualification, And in that burning, it showed you what it feels like to want something without immediately surrounding the wanting, with justification and apology and preemptive shrinking. The Mars conjunction with the North Node of Destiny showed you something even more confronting, that your desire is not separate from your evolutionary direction. It is not a distraction from your purpose or a selfish detour from it. It is pointing toward it. The Mercury retrograde surfaced the specific buried wants, the ones entombed under years of accommodation, under the accumulated sediment of a life organized around everyone else's comfort, and held them up in the retrograde light where they could not be reburied without effort. You saw them. You know what they are. Tonight, you release the guilt that has been standing between you and them, not the desires. The guilt. Write the sentence with that precision. I release the guilt about wanting, and name the specific thing, not the abstract category, the actual want, the one that tightens something in your chest when you let yourself acknowledge it fully, the one that feels too large or too selfish or too nakedly yours to say out loud without immediately softening it. Say it without softening it. Write it without softening it. Leave the guilt at the threshold of the old year where it was generated, in the cycle that is completing at midnight tonight, in the Pisces dissolution that is gathering everything that no longer belongs to you and preparing to release it into whatever comes next. Because tomorrow, the new year opens with Venus still burning in Aries and Jupiter direct in Cancer with its hands full of everything it has been holding since November. The most expansive, most abundant, most genuinely generous energy this astrological cycle has produced is opening directly in front of you at midnight tonight. And the version of you that can walk into it and actually receive what it is offering is the one that crossed the threshold, having released the guilt about deserving it. Your desire is not a character flaw. It never was. It is the most precise signal you have about the size of what you are here to build. The new year begins tomorrow. Bring the wanting. Leave the guilt behind. The fourth thing to release before midnight tonight. The exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that was never real. This is the one you will feel in your body the moment you finally name it. Not as an intellectual recognition, as a physical sensation, a loosening somewhere deep in the musculature of how you have been holding yourself together, a release of tension so chronic and so structural that you stopped experiencing it as tension and started experiencing it as your baseline. The particular fatigue of someone who has been maintaining a performance for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to simply exist without the maintenance. Because that is what this is. Not emotional exhaustion, though it is that too. Physical depletion. The kind that sleep does not touch because it is not generated by effort. It is generated by inauthenticity, by the continuous, low-grade, enormously costly labor of being someone slightly different from who you actually are in every room, in every relationship, in every moment that requires you to present the performed version instead of the real one. The body keeps that account with devastating precision, and it charges interest. The performed version is different for everyone, so let me name the most common ones and let you recognize which one is yours. For some of you, it is the version that always has it together, that is always fine, that manages every difficulty with apparent grace and visible competence, and never, under any circumstances, lets anyone see the full cost of what the management requires. This version returns calls promptly and meets deadlines, and shows up composed and handles things, perpetually handles things, while quietly running on a reserve that has been approaching empty for longer than it is comfortable to admit. For others, it is the version that is always available, always accommodating, always willing to fold its own needs into the background so that someone else's can occupy the foreground without competition or complication. This version has become so skilled at the folding that it can no longer locate, on demand, a clear answer to the question of what it actually needs, because the question has not been asked in so long that the answer has gone quiet. For others still, it is the version that is spiritually elevated, always processing, always finding the lesson, always transmuting the raw difficulty into wisdom before the raw feeling has even been permitted to exist. This version does not collapse. It integrates. It does not rage. It reflects. It does not break down in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and simply feel the unbearable weight of something without immediately reaching for the framework that makes it meaningful. The performance here is the most sophisticated and the most lonely because it happens entirely inside, where no one can see the gap between the processed version it presents and the unprocessed reality it never allows to surface. You know which one is yours. You may carry more than one. They are all, at their root, the same agreement, the internal contract you made, probably long before you had the language to negotiate it consciously, that the real version of you was too much, too intense, too different, too difficult to manage, too risky to reveal, too likely to cost you something you could not afford to lose at the time the agreement was made. So you built the performed version, and you moved into it, and you have been paying its maintenance costs ever since. 3 days ago, the moon moved over Pluto, and something in that transit refused to leave the performance intact. Pluto does not negotiate with the constructed self. It excavates. It reaches beneath the performed layer with the indifferent thoroughness of something that is only interested in what is actually there. And it makes the gap between the version you have been presenting and the version you actually are impossible to continue not seeing. The gap is visible now. You have felt it this week in the specific quality of tiredness that no amount of sleep resolves, in the particular flatness that descends when the performance is running but nothing real is moving underneath it, in the moments when someone asked how you were and the performed version answered before the real one could even locate its voice. Tonight, you release the obligation to maintain that performance, not the people who have come to expect it, not the relationships built around the performed version's reliability and consistency and perpetual availability. Those are real, and they require real navigation that does not happen in a single night. What gets released tonight is the internal agreement, the original contract, the decision made in circumstances that no longer apply, that the real version was too much, that the performed version was necessary, that the cost of the maintenance was simply the price of belonging. That contract expires tonight at midnight. Write it down with the specific language it deserves. I release the performance of and name it precisely. The competence performance, the availability performance, the spiritual elevation performance. Whatever it is, name it without the softening, and then write the second sentence. I release the obligation to be and name what the performance has required you to be for other people's comfort. Read both sentences out loud if you can. Let your own voice carry the weight of the decision into the physical space of the room where you are sitting. Then, fold the paper and release it, because tomorrow Aries season opens. And Aries is the least patient sign in the Zodiac with performance of any kind. Aries does not reward the managed version, or the processed version, or the perpetually available version. It rewards the unmediated one, the direct one, the version that knows what it wants and moves toward it without first checking whether the movement is convenient for everyone in the vicinity. The version that takes up its actual space without apologizing for the dimensions. The version of you that crosses tomorrow's threshold, having released the performance tonight, is going to feel the difference immediately. Not as dramatic revelation, as space, as the specific quality of aliveness that returns when you stop spending your energy on maintaining a version of yourself that was never real. That energy belongs to you. It has always belonged to you. Tonight, you take it back. The fifth thing to release before midnight tonight. The old timeline you have been grieving. This is the most tender of the five. The one that requires a different quality of attention than the others, not the firm, clear-eyed decisiveness that releasing a story demands, not the boundary-drawing precision that ending a dynamic requires, but something slower and more honest than either of those. Something closer to what it actually feels like to stand at the edge of a version of your life that did not become what you believed it was going to be. And to grieve it fully, without rushing toward the silver lining, before you let it go. Because what is being released here, tonight, is not a negative thing. That is what makes this the hardest one. The story that kept you small, that was imposed. The relationship dynamic that drained you, that was costing you. The guilt about your desires, the exhaustion of the performance, those were limitations, cages, agreements made under duress. You can release them with a clarity that feels, if not easy, at least righteous. What you are releasing tonight is something that was genuinely wanted. A version of your life, a version of a relationship, a version of a path, a version of a future that you did not just hope for abstractly but worked toward, held carefully, oriented yourself around, built the interior architecture of your days to accommodate. A version of things that felt, for a real period of time, like where you were going, like what was being built, like the shape your life was taking. And then this season arrived. And it took a different shape entirely. The eclipse season of this past month has been particularly thorough in its clearing of old timelines. The solar eclipse on February 17th cracked the foundation of structures you had assumed were permanent. The blood moon, on March 3rd, total, complete, the kind the sky will not produce again until 2028. Closed chapters with a finality that left no room for the comfortable ambiguity of maybe, or eventually, or not yet. What was going to change, changed. What was not meant to continue, did not continue. What had been building towards something that turned out not to be what you had understood it to be, that completed, not in the direction you were facing, but in the only direction it was ever actually going to go. The old timeline, the one you were living inside before the eclipses, before the retrograde pulled you underwater, before the extraordinary, concentrated intensity of this final month rearranged the landscape of your life in ways you did not choose and could not have anticipated. That timeline is gone. It is not paused. It is not rerouted. It is complete. It is in the past. It belongs to the astrological year that ends tonight, not to the one that begins tomorrow. And in the quiet spaces between all the intensity of this month in the 3 a.m., moments when the cosmic events had temporarily stilled and it was just you and the specific weight of what had changed, some of you have been sitting with a grief that the language of astrological transformation does not always make adequate room for. A quiet mourning, not dramatic, not consuming, but persistent, present in the way that real loss is present, not as a constant foreground experience, but as a background frequency. A low hum beneath everything else, the specific undertone of someone who has been carrying the gap between what they hoped for and what arrived, the relationship that did not become what you believed it was becoming, the path that shifted in a direction you did not select and would not have chosen. The version of yourself, the person you were before this season, moved through you that is also gone, changed in ways that were not entirely voluntary, and that cost you something, even as they clarified something. You are not the same person who entered February. That person is behind you now, and there is a grief in that too. Even when the change is ultimately for the better, even when you can feel, underneath the loss, the first faint outline of something more genuinely aligned beginning to take shape. Tonight, before you release the old timeline, you acknowledge it. This is not optional. This is not a step you can skip in the interest of moving efficiently toward the new year. The grief is real. The hope that preceded it was real. The vision was real. The work you put into the version of things that did not arrive was real. And real things deserve to be witnessed before they are released, not because holding on to them serves you, but because bypassing them, rushing past them in a performance of spiritual acceptance that skips the actual feeling, does not constitute genuine release. It constitutes suppression wearing the costume of release. And what is suppressed does not stay behind at the threshold. It crosses with you, unacknowledged and unresolved, and surfaces in the new year wearing different clothes. So tonight, give it a moment, the real moment it deserves. Feel the specific texture of the grief, not the generalized sadness of loss in the abstract, but the precise, particular loss of this specific thing, this specific vision, this specific version of how you believed things were going. Let it be fully present, fully real, fully honored in the final hours of the cycle that contained it. And then, with that honoring complete, not bypassed, not performed, but genuinely done, release it at the threshold. Write down what the old timeline was, the actual version of things you were holding. Not the sanitized summary, but the real picture. What you saw when you imagined where things were going. What you felt when you believed in it. What specifically you lost when it became clear it was not going to arrive. Write it as an act of witnessing, of making it real on the page before you let it go. And then write directly below it, I release my attachment to this timeline. I trust that what the new year carries is more genuinely aligned with who I actually am than what I was holding on to. I release this not because it did not matter, but because it is complete. Here is the truth this entire season has been demonstrating. Through every eclipse and every retrograde depth and every excavation and every activation, through every event that felt like disruption, but was operating with a precision that disruption does not possess. The universe is not random. The clearing that has happened across this extraordinary month has not been chaos. It has been purposeful. Specifically, surgically purposeful. Targeted at exactly what needed to complete, so that what is genuinely meant to arrive, what could not find its way to you, while the old timeline was occupying the space where it needed to land, can finally move forward without obstruction. The old timeline was not taken from you. It was completed by a sky that can see further down the road than the version of you standing in the middle of it, grieving what you could not yet see you were being redirected toward. Tomorrow, the new timeline takes its first steps. You do not need to see where it ends. You only need to cross tonight's threshold, having genuinely released what belongs to the cycle ending behind you. The grief was real. Honor it fully, then set it down. The new year is waiting on the other side of that release, and it has been cleared, specifically and deliberately, to make room for you. Now let me give you the process, because everything you have heard in the last several minutes is not philosophy. It is not content to consume and carry lightly into tomorrow as an interesting framework for thinking about your life. It is a set of real things that need to be actually, physically, specifically released before the clock turns over tonight. And there is a right way to do that. Not ceremonially elaborate, not spiritually performative, just precise, just honest, just real enough to reach the places where these 5 things actually live. Find a quiet moment tonight. Not a hurried 5 minutes between other obligations. A real moment after the house has settled, after the noise of the day has thinned, after the ordinary demands of your life have temporarily released their grip and left you with something approaching stillness. That is the moment. Work with it when it arrives. Sit down with a single piece of paper and a pen. Not your phone, not a notes app, not a keyboard. Paper and pen because the hand knows things the typing fingers do not, because the physical act of forming words in your own handwriting engages the body in the releasing in a way that no screen can replicate. The body needs to participate tonight. This is not a thought experiment. It is a threshold crossing, and threshold crossings require the whole of you, not just the part that processes language. At the top of the page, write 1 line, what I am leaving in the astrological year that ends tonight. Then write all 5, the story that kept you small, the relationship dynamic that drained you, the guilt about wanting what you actually want, the exhaustion of performing the version of yourself that was never real, the grief about the old timeline. Write each one specifically, in your own words, as concretely and as honestly as the moment allows. Not the edited version, not the version you would be comfortable showing someone else. The real one, the specific sentence, the actual name, the precise thing, because vague releases produce vague results, and tonight the window is too important and too narrow for anything less than full precision. When all 5 are written, read them back to yourself out loud. Let your own voice carry the words into the physical space of the room. Let them be real in the air, not just on the page. There is something about speaking what you have written, hearing your own voice name what you are releasing that completes a circuit the silent reading does not close. Then fold the paper and release it. Burn it, if you have a safe way to do so. Fire is the oldest technology of transformation the human species possesses. Tear it into pieces if burning is not possible. Bury it. Release it into running water. Whatever physical act carries, for you, the full weight of a real and final decision. Then sleep. Let tonight be the last night of the old year, in every sense that matters. Let the releasing continue in your dreaming, in the deep interior work that the conscious mind steps aside for when the body finally rests. Let the Pisces dissolution that is completing at midnight do what it came to do, gather what belongs to the ending cycle, and carry it away from you permanently. And when you wake tomorrow morning in the Aries New Year, with Mercury direct and the sun crossing the celestial equator and the cosmic clock reset to 0, let the version of you that opens its eyes be the one that crossed tonight's threshold, having actually done what tonight asked, not the one that understood it, not the one that found it resonant and meaningful and planned to do the work eventually, the one that did it, tonight, before midnight, while the window was still open. Tomorrow the new year begins, and it begins for that version of you. The threshold is here, not approaching, not somewhere down the road past a few more preparations and a few more delays. Here, tonight, in the final hours of the last day of everything this extraordinary, relentless, clarifying year has asked of you. Tonight is the last night of the person you have been carrying through all of it. Tomorrow is the first morning of the one who set that weight down at the threshold and stepped through without it. That crossing happens once, in this specific window, before midnight tonight. So, do the work. Write the 5 things down. Speak them aloud in the quiet of wherever you are. Release them with the full weight of a decision that knows exactly what it is deciding. And then sleep knowing that when you wake tomorrow in the Aries New Year, with Mercury direct and the sun burning fresh at the first degree of the first sign, you are waking as the version of yourself that actually crossed, not the one that watched the threshold from a distance and made plans to approach it eventually. The one that crossed. This is Lucid Cosmos. If what you heard tonight reached somewhere real in you, somewhere below the surface, where the actual work of your life is being done, subscribe. Because tomorrow, the new year opens, and I will be here, walking you through exactly what that opening means and precisely how to step into it, carrying only what genuinely belongs to your next chapter. Drop in the comments, which of the 5 releases hit you hardest tonight. Name what you are leaving at the threshold, because naming it makes the release more real. And your words in that comment section may be the exact permission someone else needs to finally set their weight down too. Tonight is the last night. Tomorrow, the new year begins. Step through.